You're listening to the A Bit From Within podcast with Felicia Marty. What you want to do by creating a plan is figure out a way that you're going to be able to hold that firm without having to only be strong, because you're not always going to have energy or strength while you go through this. You're not always going to have the resolve to have the fight. And if it's only an active fight, you're going to end up giving in. The first thing I'll say is that you have to get really clear about what is the issue here? 2, why? Why does this matter to you? And then finally, how? How do you need to move forward? If you can get really clear about those 3 things, you can start to put a plan in place. Hello there, and thank you so much for tuning in for a new episode of the A Bit From Within podcast. My name is Felicia, and I come here every week to share a little bit from within with you. A lot of what I do is specialize in mindfulness tools like guided meditation, gentle yoga, and astrology, but also in helping you to remember that a little bit of mindfulness can go a long way. Like small changes that you implement in your everyday life can lead to really big results for yourself. Things that you weren't sure that you were capable of giving yourself, you can. And that is what I'm here to share about. I share a little bit from within my own journey, what I've been going through, and I hope that it makes a difference and connects to a little bit from within you as well. So this week, we're going to be talking about standing up for yourself. And right now is a really great time to talk about this because we are in the pre-holiday zone. Like we're about to get into like the thick of holiday season. And I feel like this is when a lot of big stuff comes up, like relationships, drama, changes, stress is high, tension is high. Here in the Northern Hemisphere, we have darker days. There's some of that going on as well. So I want to really dive in today around how hard it is to stand up for yourself, like how to know if you are standing up for yourself in like a good way, like from a place of inner strength and conviction and like, yes, this is what I need to do for me, or how to compare that to like, are you just being selfish? Are you just being demanding? Are you just trying to get your own way? Most of the time, I think the people who are tuning into this podcast, you're probably the former, like you're probably struggling to set boundaries, to know if you're making the right decisions, but sometimes having something to compare that against makes it a little bit easier. So we're going to dive into all of this, but first, let's dive into the astro check-in for the week. What is going on astrologically? How might that be affecting you? And what are some of the like little seeds you can plant of awareness that can help you throughout the week ahead? Well, first things first, on the day I'm recording this today, it is Monday, October 17th. Yes, that's right. Oh my gosh, when I say that, I've like all day as I've been thinking about the fact that like it is mid-October, I have just been in shock by how fast this year has gone. Like I feel like, and this happens for me every year that I've been in wedding photography, which is what I've been doing for my full-time job. It feels like the summer to the fall just goes so fast. And so for me, this is the time of year as weddings start to slow back down that I feel like, where did the time go? Like, where has this year gone? And I've also been trying to be more mindful than ever and just really appreciate month to month, keeping track of the lunar cycles and doing the lunar guides each month for Patreon members. It really does help me kind of plug into each month and try to be more aware of what's happening. And I do think that that's helped, but it doesn't change the fact that like time goes by so fast. So sorry, I just had to throw that in there. So yes, today, Monday, is the last quarter moon. So as you start to look up into the sky this week, if you're listening to this on Tuesday, you're going to notice, still last quarter, moon is half full right now. But as we go through the week, we're going to be winding down to the moon becoming totally dark. So we are in the final week of the lunar cycle. This is an important time. As you guys know, if you've been following me for a while, I like to divide the lunar cycle into 2 sections. I just think it's a little bit easier this way to really focus on the new moon first 2 weeks of the lunar cycle, and then the full moon the last 2 weeks of this lunar cycle. And the new moon part is a little bit more about growing and planting seeds and things coming and putting energy out there and creating plans. And then the full moon part is a lot more about letting things go, wrapping things up, and things coming to a culmination. Also finding surrender and rest. So, with all of that said, we are smack in the middle of the rest part, of the surrender part, of the letting go part of the lunar phase. And this means that as we move through this week, you might be feeling a little bit more sluggish than you have been lately. I think that the changing seasons is really aiding in that. I think the darker days that we're really starting to notice is going to be aiding in that as well. So if you are just feeling like you can't get enough sleep right now, if you're feeling like you need a little bit more space or to go a lot slower, please honor that. Give yourself that permission. It is not a time where you need to rush around or be an Energizer bunny or feel like you have to do more and be more and whatnot. Like, it is more than enough. In fact, towards the beginning of this week, so Tuesday and Wednesday of this week, it's going to be important to kind of start to be in a little bit of that like boss mode where the boss comes in and is like, it's time to make the decisions. Like, we can't sit on this stuff anymore. Where are we at with this? Where are we at with this? Okay, this isn't coming together. We're tabling that until next month. Like, it is not the time to be really creative or like in the middle of the process where we're trying to fix and solve a lot of things. It's like we're trying to wrap up and tie up loose ends. And so this is a good time to delegate, to get stuff off your list, or to reschedule it, to reprioritize, and really start to figure out what matters most right now. What do you have time and energy for? And that might look different right now in actuality than you thought it was a week ago or 2 weeks ago when you maybe started to plan some of this stuff or have expectations. So be real with what's happening, readjust. I promise that you will be better for it. And here's the other thing. We are coming up on a solar eclipse. It's technically next Tuesday, October 25th. It is a solar eclipse, and a solar eclipse always comes at a new moon. So new moon in Scorpio. And this is interesting because it's right after the sun moves into a new sign. So sun is moving from Libra, where it is right now, and then it'll be moving into Scorpio on Sunday. It's also going to be conjunct Venus. So that brings a little bit of an extra punch with just where the sun, moon, and Venus are all going to be on the same page together. And eclipses are times where things change quickly, where things that you didn't predict come into your life, when big change is imminent, especially around a solar eclipse. Solar eclipses are like the most intense and powerful new moons. So if you thought that, a new moon is a really good time to manifest things, to set intentions, they are. But with solar eclipses, it is like a new beginning being gifted to you, where great opportunities come to you, where your life is transforming. And honestly, this can be in good and sometimes bad ways. And there's no reason to get kind of like scared or anything like that. It's just a matter of being able to really slow down and be open. I definitely don't recommend doing any kind of manifestation rituals during this solar eclipse because there is that unpredictable energy to it. So if you really try to sow intentions and commit to things around this new moon, it's going to have that unpredictable and kind of steroidy energy to it. So it's better just to relax and be open and see what is coming your way right now. Now, of course, depending on your own personal astrological chart, this eclipse is going to be affecting you in different ways. If these planets are like right affecting your personal signs, like I can use my boyfriend Dave, for instance, his birthday is on Sunday. So all of this, the sun, the moon, and Venus right now is going to be in the same place, very, very close to the same place it was when he was born. And so for him, when you have a birthday near this time, like this is a big time in your life. This is a big indicator that like this year or this time in your life is going to be a big one. And it might have some threads to connect it to what was happening for you about 6 months ago, when these eclipses were already starting to talk and to really make their energy starting to be known back in April and May. So that's just something to keep in mind. Remember that like not every eclipse is going to bring a life-changing event into your life, but also don't be surprised if big things do come up around eclipses, because this is when like the doors are opening and closing, ones that like you don't open yourself or close yourself. And so keep your heart open, go slowly, and just see what happens. I'll talk more about this next week, like on the actual day of the solar eclipse. But the reason I brought all of this up is because I want you to know that with eclipses, we can really start to feel that energy even 5 days beforehand. So 5 days beforehand will be October 20th, which is on Thursday. So again, take some time this weekend to slow down, to spend meaningful time with yourself, with other people, to connect, and just to be very aware of what's going on in your life and inside of you. And if you feel like, big change is imminent or you're trying to make some decisions right now, just be patient because the path will be made clear. It's funny. I'll just share a little bit personally. I was kind of looking at all of the astrology coming up, and, you can kind of compartmentalize things. Like for me, I have known that this eclipse was coming up on October 25th, but I didn't really connect it as I've been planning Dave's birthday. I know that sounds kind of silly, especially for an astrologer. But then once I started to think about what kind of year he was going to be having coming up, and I started to realize, I'm like, oh my gosh, like this is going to be conjunct his natal sun, and he's got a couple of other really important placements close by. I just started thinking like, oh my gosh, this is going to be a really big year for you. And to be honest, at first it made me feel a little bit scared. And I think that is normal, especially for anxious people, that sometimes I can kind of lean towards, oh my gosh, is something bad going to happen? Like, I want to be able to control that. I want to be able to prevent it. And especially after the last year we've had with Dave just going through so much of his medical issues, and he's finally just starting to round the corner a little bit, or like things are starting to make a little bit more sense of what he's going through and how he can work to fix it. And it's been feeling okay again for the first time in a really long time. I think that made me feel even more nervous. And then I had to kind of pause and slow down and remember, change looks at different ways at different points of our life. And I remembered that back in 2020, there was actually a solar eclipse on my birthday. Or it was near my birthday. So it was actually on June 21st of 2020. And I remember it was during 2020 that I really started following the moon more closely and getting a lot more into my astrological studies in an everyday kind of way. And I was like excited for the solar eclipse, just feeling like, oh my gosh, I mean, at that point we had already been like a couple months deep into the pandemic, and it had really been affecting my business. And I thought, where is all of this going? And so I remember thinking like, this is a time of change, but I don't remember anything like crazy happening that was like something I could pinpoint, like a loss or an addition or a gain or something like very specific. I do think that 2020 is when things really started rolling that have led me to this place that now, a year and a half, or no, not a year and a half, 2.5 years later, that I am starting to step away from wedding photography. I think that those seeds started to plant then, and it's probably all connected, very much so. But if I hadn't been really starting to keep track of what was happening for me by following the lunar cycles and things, I couldn't look back and make that connection. And I couldn't have that as a little story to tell even to Dave, as like, hey, like, this might be something kind of cool for you to go through. And it may not be something that like you get a job offered to you right now, but it could be the beginning of, a really big shift in your life. Maybe it's a career, maybe it's, where we're at in our relationship, maybe it's something totally different. For him, I wonder if it's connected with where we live, because the part of his chart where this is happening has to do with home. And so that's a topic we've already been talking a lot about. And again, eclipses, well, I haven't explained this today, but I have talked about this before. Eclipses come in a season. Sorry, I lost the word for a second. Eclipses come in a season. So they, like I said, this one was also connected to last spring. It's also going to be connected to ones that come up over the course of entire year of 2023. So basically, it takes time. And if there's anything that we can count on with eclipses, is that they happen every single year. And if we say anything, we always talk about how change is the only constant in our life. And I think that eclipses represent those big unexpected changes in our lives, where we pivot, where we look at things differently, where we move to a place that we didn't expect. And then if you want to continue to look at nature in terms of change, I love just looking at the moon in general, because the moon is in a constant state of change. In fact, it moves through its entire cycle in 28 days. That is incredibly fast. And so when we look to nature and we look to like the seasons and we see how the world turns and the moon turns and we move through the entire zodiac in a year, the sun moves around us. Or even like each day, how the rising sign goes through an entire cycle through the entire 12 signs of the zodiac in one day. It's just incredible to remember how much things are changing. And when we're in a really big place of change in our life, it's important to slow down. And there's nothing wrong with going slow and slowing down. You hear me talk about this all the time. I'm always talking about this in my daily reminders on TikTok, in my blog posts, in every episode of the podcast. I'm always talking about slowing down. And it's because we live in a society where the idea of slowing down is one that feels like it's for the weak, or that it's nice in theory, but you still have to have all your shit together. Or if you want to rest and need to rest, you better be prepared and already have everything. You've better worked ahead so that you can earn your rest. And this kind of stuff is just crazy. It's useless. It's not connected with nature or natural rhythms. And so we need to remember that like doing more is not always the answer. And it's okay to remind yourself of that. It's okay to really take what I'm saying right now as permission to write yourself a little rest slip. It's something that I have to remind myself over and over, especially because so much of how I cope with anxiety is by doing. Some of that is just my nature. There are definitely parts of my own astrological chart that really resonate with that fast mercurial speed, with wanting to get stuff done and to be efficient. And so it's even more important if you feel like that, or if you're in a place in your life that you resonate with that speed and going, to remember like, this is not what it's all about. And it's okay for me to find balance. It's okay, especially this final week of this last quarter moon of the entire Libra lunar cycle. It is okay to wind down. All good things like come to a close, and then you can pick up whatever was left that you still want to keep working on and take it into the next cycle with you. So anyway, that's a little bit on the longer side for our Astro check-in, but lots to cover this week, right? All right, let's take a quick break and let's come back and talk about connecting with that inner strength to set good boundaries and to stand up for yourself. All right, here we go. Let's have the boundary conversation, the conversation about how to know when it's right for us to stand up for ourselves. Personally, I feel like so much of, people in the world talk about setting boundaries like it should be the most natural thing, or it should be something that we are all good at. And yet, how often do we think back to our childhoods and we think about encountering conflict or bullies or friends who are just being kind of jerks, and we think about how we probably had no idea how to stand up for ourselves, or how in an effort to stand up for ourselves, we got into like really big fights, or we got really hurt feelings, or we never figured it out, and we ended up losing friendships and losing people and not being able to figure it out the right way. And so I think that, of course, carries on as we continue to get older. We kind of learn what has worked for us. Like, I think some people have learned like to be really defensive. Some people learn to be really manipulative. Some people learn to over communicate. Some people learn to be stepped all over so that other people could get their way. And of course, it's not always just one of these things. Sometimes we are a combination of all kinds of these things. Like, we can be a little bit manipulative in this area. We can be a little bit of a pushover in this area. We can be like this with our careers, but we can be like this with our families. Like, this is complex, right? So as you start to think about where you're at in your relationships or in your dynamics, whether it is personal, work, social media, friendships, whatever it is, and you start to think about the areas of your life where like there is a huge miss happening, it is a challenge to start to imagine or even to know where to begin to stand up for yourself. So we're going to be talking about two different parts of this. The first part is we're going to dive into how do you know if you should stand up for yourself? Like, if you're standing up for yourself is a good thing, or if you're just one of those, like, if you're in like a selfish era of your life. I'm going to kind of dive into that and give some thoughts there. The second thing we're going to talk about are like the 4 things I think it's important to remember that will help you keep standing up for yourself even when it feels scary. So let's just like talk about the selfish part of it. I think for me personally, one of the things that I've always struggled with was feeling like I was a brat or like I was being selfish. And I felt very triggered or like ashamed of if I were being too selfish or if I were being too demanding. And this is really hard because as a kind of leader personality and somebody who can be a little bit bossy. In fact, my whole team of photographers, they always joke and they call me boss because like I can be a little bit bossy, especially as a photographer. I mean, I like to have fun with it and make people know that like it's all for the sake of a good picture and like tease and have fun with it. And it works really well, but I'm still telling people what to do. In fact, like my degree, a lot of you guys know, is in theater, in directing, in production development. And the work that I was trained to do to excel in was to guide other people to make decisions on how things should go. And so I've always, had this reputation for being bossy. And I've never, ever, though, wanted to be that stereotypical kid who was just bossy or just selfish or who had to have their own way. For me, those connotations felt really gross and bad. And so a lot of the time, I started to feel kind of tangled up around actually feeling like I needed to stand up for myself or set a boundary, because it's so easy when you start to do that for people to come back with, well, you're just being so selfish, or like it's always your way. And so let's talk about that. Like, what is the difference between being like, no, I'm at a place in my life where I need to stand up for myself and this is what needs to happen, versus what it might look like if you're being a little bit stuck in your ways. And I've kind of labeled this like the selfish version of it. Now, a little asterisk. Sometimes in our lives, we have a reason to enter our selfish era. I don't think it's good to live there. I don't think that if you've already lived that your whole life, I think it's a good idea to maybe start examining that and trying a different way. But this advice it can only pertain to what you have going on. So if you are coming out of a really tough situation and you have to enter selfish mode in order to get yourself out of that and to change your life, like that is what is required. So I'm not going to like fault anybody for being where they need to be with these things. But I just want to distinguish the two because I think seeing them clearly helps you figure out which one you are, which makes it a little bit less of a difficult emotional process to embody being strong inside of yourself. So, to me, being in your selfish era of always standing up for yourself, this can look like only being open to your way and without considering anybody else. So it's always your way or the highway. You're not really weighing other people's opinions. You're not really listening to the bigger picture, or considering any of that. Like it is just what you want and when you want it. Along with this is demanding whatever is easiest or most convenient for you. So like the decisions that you're leaning towards or the things that you're asking for are in the moment what is most convenient and easiest for you. You're not really willing to put yourself through something that could be a little bit more taxing or bring a little bit more conflict or more stress into your life. You only want what is going to be best for you instead of like really looking at the big picture. Again, this is where it gets hard to weigh the things out because some of, wanting what's best for yourself is a part of being strong in yourself. And do we all know what that looks like when it gets taken too far? I definitely think so. Like we've all met those people where it's like, no, you're being so selfish. Like you don't even care about the fact that it's not always about you. And so I think that is definitely an element of this. I think another indication of being in the selfish mode is when what you're needing changes like frequently depending on the situation or like what feels best in the moment. So you're going to be inconsistent. It could manifest as like maybe from the outside it looks like lying to different people, but from the inside it could just be like changing your mind a lot, not being dependable, and what you're requesting or what you're needing from other people depends on the situation that you're in. So it's not very consistent. The other part that is really hard about this is that usually this kind of behavior and what you're trying to do when you're in selfish mode is aimed at controlling other people's behavior and the outcomes of situations. So the things that you're asking for are not for you personally, but said to try to control the situation around you. And we know we cannot control others. So if you are looking at all of your behavior in all of these situations and what you're asking for is to try to control others or to control a situation, that's a sign that some self-reflection might be needed. And then finally, caring only about your needs being met. This is kind of similar to like demanding whatever is easiest and most convenient for you. But truly, like if you don't care that like there are other people involved who have needs, who have feelings, that's again a sign to look out for some self-reflection and maybe change your ways a little bit. Now, I will say, again, I feel like most people who are listening to this podcast are going to probably fall more into the opposite category. But are there times in our life where we can sometimes get a little bit towards that selfish side for whatever reason? Yes. Like that can happen. Sometimes I think I have a little bit of like rose-colored glasses on where I just like to see the best in everybody and think that we're all trying our best and trying really hard to be like perfect. I know a lot of perfectionists who feel similarly listen to this show, but that's not all of us. And I do think that there are many of us who, if we're being honest with ourselves, we can admit some of our flaws. And sometimes you might fall into that like category where maybe what this will do is help you understand that like maybe it's time to try incorporating other people's ideas, listening to their perspective and seeing how you can be a little bit more flexible and more other oriented. So I'll just say that. Now, the inner strength way, like setting boundaries and standing up for yourself from a place of inner strength. What does this look like? To me, this looks like a person who has probably had to wrestle with the decision that they're coming to, that doesn't make decisions lightly because they are busy taking time weighing multiple perspectives, looking at the picture, figuring out like who's involved and who's this going to affect and how do I play into that picture. And so what's the best way for everyone? And again, this is where it gets complicated because sometimes when you're so focused on seeing the big picture, you can forget that your needs matter too. But that kind of leads us into the second point, which is when you're at this place, when you start to see the big picture, maybe you start to see the pattern and you start to recognize that there are needs that are unmet or that there are certain patterns that keep repeating themselves that are destructive, that you're finally like, this can't go on like this. So it matters for you. You're starting to recognize your own needs. You're starting to realize that it's time to draw a line in the sand. And it's not always easy to come to that place, but you realize that it's time. Like that kind of feeds into my third point, which is it's not always easy, but you understand the importance. And knowing why it's important is key in this process. The next sign of knowing that you are doing it from a place for your own inner strength is that is something that you stand behind regardless of if the outcome changes. So this is kind of in comparison to the part of like aiming to control others. You're not aiming to control others, like you're aiming to feel like you're very strong and standing for exactly what you need, even if the outcome changes. Now, if that sounds a little confusing, I'm going to go into more detail and give an example when it comes to actually setting the boundary. So just hang in there another minute or two. The final one for knowing that you are operating from a place of inner strength is what you care about has a lot more to do than what's only right for you. Yes, you might be in a certain kind of situation where like, it's time to, again, like you have to sort of enter selfish mode and be like, I might be called selfish for doing this, but this is what I need. But more often than not, what you're caring about has to do with not just in the moment self-gratification, but about moving into a different chapter of your life, moving into a different era, finally not putting up with destructive or harmful behaviors, that kind of thing. And most of the time, I think that it's not usually just if it's a bigger than just like a you versus them type thing, that it's caring about more than just yourself. It's caring about other people that are involved too. So again, the reason why I share this compare and contrast between the two is if you are a person who, like me, has sometimes felt like I can't stand up for myself, like I don't want to cause waves, or I don't want to be seen as selfish, I don't want to be called, bad names or whatnot, like it's hard for me to make a scene on this or to stand up. It's good to be able to actually have the comparison between, well, like, what would it actually look like if you were just being selfish? And then what does it look like if it's really time to make a change? And hopefully that helps give you a little bit more peace of mind and inspiration that if you do have to step into a place in your life where you have to set a boundary, like it is okay. It's not always easy, but it's for the right reasons. And so hang in there and support yourself through this process. So speaking of which, let me share a few things I think it is so important to keep in mind when you've entered this place in your life. The first one is have a plan in place. So this one is so important, which is why I put it first. You have to know what your plan is. Like if you go in without a plan, it's going to end up feeling like a tug of war, or like the kind of tug of war that happens when you're like trying to close the door and somebody's trying to come in, and you just end up feeling like you're literally in the fight of somebody trying to come through, and it's all up for how much energy and strength that you have. And so what you want to do by creating a plan is figure out a way that you're going to be able to hold that firm without having to only be strong or only be energized. because you're not always going to have energy or strength while you go through this. You're not always going to have the resolve to have the fight. And if it's only an active fight, you're going to end up giving in, because who wouldn't eventually? You're going to get tired, or they're going to change their tactics. And so you have to have a solid plan in place. Now, of course, the harder part is like, okay, how do you do this? And the first thing I'll say is that you have to get really clear about what is the issue here? Two, why? Why does this matter to you? And then finally, how? Like, how do you need to move forward? If you can get really clear about those three things, you can start to put a plan in place. And I will say that, and this goes back to what I was saying before about either are you trying to control others, or are you going to be able to stand behind something regardless if the outcome changes? This comes into creating that plan and having it into place, and there's actually this great boundary setting example that I once heard that, and I can't remember where I heard it, but I'll pass along the analogy. So when you are setting a boundary, your boundary cannot be or have anything to do with other people's actions. It can't be like, well, my boundary is that like my husband doesn't spend money. Like, can you control your husband spending money? Like, you might try, you might, take away his credit cards or freeze his accounts. What if he's handed, or finds a $50 bill on the ground? Like, what if he spends that? Like, you cannot control other people's behaviors. So your boundary can't be about what other people are going to do. Your boundary has to be about what you are going to do. So a really clear example of this is, let's say that like you have this dedicated time where you want to focus. Okay. So you're like, every day between 3 and 5 p.m., I just need total silence. I need to not be bothered by other people. So you tell everybody who normally calls you or who's in your house, like, this is my alone time. You explain explicitly, like, I don't want to be bothered between 3 and 5. Like, this is my me time. Don't call me. Don't talk to me. Don't bug me. And then it's 3 o'clock on the day. You've set your boundary. You get into your zone. And then all of a sudden, boom, somebody walks through the door or somebody calls you on your phone. What are you supposed to do? A lot of us, what we'll do is we'll get so mad. I told you don't disturb me. Like, I set this boundary and you violated my boundary. It definitely gets harder when people are actually coming into the room, but you hold that boundary firm. Hey, I'm not available right now, and they need to go, right? Instead of answering that phone call and saying, again, I told you not to call me. This is my time where you're not supposed to call me. You don't answer. Your phone is in the other room. You don't even know what's going on because you've let people know what to expect and you're sticking to what works for you. Now, if somebody were to get mad at you and say, why didn't you answer my call? I called you at 3:45 and you didn't answer. Right. Because I told you that I'm not answering calls between 3 and 5. That's the boundary. It's not about them. They can get mad. They can be sad. They could be whatever they want, or they could accept it and not call you and call you at 5 o'clock and chat with you then, right? So it's not about how they react. It's not about the outcome. Like, you're not worried about, oh, I'm only going to do this if they're happy that I did this, if they're okay with it. No, I'm going to hold this boundary firm because it's what I need. And it doesn't matter if they're upset with me about it. I'm not going to change that boundary because of that. And that's kind of an easy example to really think about this on a smaller scale, but in a relatable way. So as you think about the plans that you're going to put into place, you might have to start to think about that it has to be something that you are going to control for yourself, and that other people may not be happy with, and that has to be part of your plan as well. Which leads to the next thing I want you to remember, which is start small, because a lot of trial and error is going to be required. This is so important because you are creating a new version of yourself that is probably not right away going to be like the most incredibly capable, competent, like boundary creating, setting, and maintaining person that you've ever seen. Like, it's going to be a little awkward. It's going to be a little hard to figure out what works and what doesn't work. And especially in the beginning, you might need to like try a boundary that you suddenly realize like, okay, that's not as realistic, or like, I can't maintain that full time. I think this one comes up a lot for people that are trying to set boundaries with like their parents, because for a lot of people, grandparents are like babysitters and or an integral part of a family, like family businesses. Like, there are certain situations where like you can't just straight up be like, well, I'm going to ghost you because I don't like how you've been behaving. Like, that doesn't always work logistically. And so you might have to find other ways to like make certain conversations a do not talk about this type of thing. And maybe there's certain levels to the plan. It's like, okay, we're going to start here, and you might have to readjust depending on how unwilling other people are to understand that you've set this boundary and to respect it. And I get that that's a little hard because we just talked about how we can't control other people, right? So you can't control if somebody else is going to respect your boundary. But you kind of do have to have a plan in the back of your mind for like, well, what happens if somebody is just straight up not respecting it at all? Is it as simple as you not answering their call? Or is it something where it's like, well, yeah, guess what? Now I can't talk to you because every time we talk, you're literally crossing and violating something that I'm not willing to tolerate. And that can get a lot more complicated and might be something that it takes a lot more time than just a simple, like, I'm done talking to you, right? Especially with family. Like, I know so many people who have dealt with this with members of their family that they can't just ghost, right? Like say you have kids and your grandparents watch the kids and you don't have the income right now to go spend a ton of money at daycare. And so there's certain situations where like you're going to have to really figure out like, what does this look like? And obviously I can't present that answer to you via podcast without knowing exactly what it is. But I do think that being willing to try trial and error is such an important part of the process, and to start small, because if you make a boundary that's too hard to enforce right away, or you do it from a place of impulsivity that you really can't maintain, like, it's going to make you lack confidence in yourself and your ability to do this. So start small in a way that like is something that you can stick with and that you can adapt as you might need. And then the next thing that I really want you to remember with all of this is that try to not get overwhelmed by thinking into the long term. Yes, of course, with some big things, like, could this affect like possibly the rest of your life? Maybe, but things do change. And so it's so important to take things day by day, or even like situation by situation. So if, let's use the holidays, for example, like, let's say there's a lot of family stuff going on for you this year, or personal stuff that's making it hard to integrate with certain parts of your family. Like, you don't need to be like, okay, well, this is how I'm planning the entire holiday season. And I mean, if you need to do that, if you only see your family like on one holiday, that's totally fine. But if you live in a family where you see each other often, maybe you take it holiday by holiday, and you try not to, I mean, you might need to have a loose plan in place for, Thanksgiving and Christmas, but try not to let yourself get swept away in the emotion of what's happening at Christmas if you haven't even gotten to Thanksgiving yet, or to Halloween, right? Like, all of this is just to say, take it slowly, take it step by step. Part of this is because people change. Okay, so people change, situations change. It would be nice if you could just set a boundary and then people would change automatically and you'd feel like, wow, that was so easy and so effective. A lot of the times, especially the more stuck things are, it is going to take time. It might take 6 months. It might take a year. It might be several years. It might be the rest of your life. But those boundaries that you're going to set, they are breathable fabric, okay? So you can try not to get swept away if it stresses you out thinking of like what this will be like forever. Try to just take it step by step, slow down, be willing to compartmentalize it. And I think that that really does help. And all of this connects with the final point I have for you here, something for you to remember, which is you're going to have to leave space for the grief, because whenever this kind of work is coming up for you, so does a certain amount of grief. And this can show up a lot of different ways, right? Like there are stages of grief for a reason. This can show up as anger. It can show up as being in denial. It can show up as depression. It could also show up as like an overwhelming sadness or crying or feeling like, why me? Or even just a lot of time spent processing what you've had to go through and how you got to this point, or grieving what it could have been like, or what you feel like it should have been like, or how you pictured it going. It is so hard when you have to make a choice that changes what you pictured happening. You know, a couple years ago, I went through a hard family situation and it was during 2020, so it was in some ways easier at that point to kind of accept not being with family at Thanksgiving or at Christmas. But that whole, year I'd been going through a really hard family situation that just made me feel like, yeah, I'm not going to come around. I'm not going to spend time with these people. Like I need some space. I've got a lot to figure out, and I'm just not willing to continue being a part of the dance that we had been doing. And so when I set that boundary, like it was really hard. I didn't want to picture what Thanksgiving looked like without those people. So if you're feeling that too, if you're feeling the grief that like what you hoped for is not what's happening in reality, it is okay to be sad. It is okay to be angry. It is okay to feel resentment over those things. And it's something that you have to allow yourself to work through and to be honest with yourself about, and to be willing to face those fears as opposed to trying to control what other people are willing to do. Because you might say like, this would be so simple if you would just blank, like fill in the blank, but you can't control other people. If they're not willing to bend, then truly like all you can do is come to a place of acceptance. And that is so much easier said than done. Like that is a really hard work. And so I want you to remember that. And, of course, the bigger the situation or the more personal it is, the more that you might want to check out like working with a licensed therapist during a time like this, like for real. But there are plenty of things that you can do to support yourself through a process like this. And I will say that these kind of things are, tools that I specialize in, like guided meditation, gentle yoga, daily affirmations, surrounding yourself with positive and encouraging talk, remembering all of the different mindfulness practices, even slowing down and like connecting with the moon, like giving yourself positive things to do that plug you back into yourself. Self-love and self-care practices go a long way. They are going to be the fabric that holds you as you go through something like this. So just keep this in mind. And, with all of this said, I brought this up for a reason in this kind of pre-holiday mode, because I know that the holidays are a very challenging time of year, because it's a time where there's a lot of expectations. Our expectations for ourselves, the expectations of others, feeling like, tradition is at hand, like, we've always done it this way, or this is what people, again, expect. And it can be really hard to find the strength inside to stand up for yourself, even if it has nothing to do with a conflict of other people, right? Like, let's say that this is just the first year that like you by yourself, even, let's just say you by yourself, you just want out of the holiday rigmarole and you want to go spend a week on a beach somewhere. And that's how you want to spend the holiday. And instead, you have all these people, you can't do that. Like, what about grandma? What about this? What about your niece? Like, so much input from other people. It might not even be like an actual problem you have with anybody else, but just something that you need for yourself, something you know inside. It is still challenging to find that kind of strength to do what you know you need to do. So as you move through the next few months, and of course, if you somehow are finding this in like the spring or the summer or any time of year, this all still counts, right? Like, this is universal advice. But I wanted to bring it up because I want you to feel prepared and not caught off guard. Like, not like you're behind that door that's trying to be opening, like you're in the middle of a fight, when it's already like the stakes are already higher, when you feel like there's a lot of expectations, when you feel like there were a lot of hopes that could possibly have to have plans changed. And we do, again, like to tie it all the way back to the beginning, we do have all these eclipses coming up. And I could see that in some situations, like depending on how people behave and what buttons get pressed, that maybe things for the holidays won't go as originally hoped for. And what I try to do is I try to just be open to being in the present. What's happening now and how can you make the best of it? It doesn't take away the fact that like you might feel sad about it or feel angry about it. But there are reasons that things happen. And if you hang in there and you do what's best for you, it will lead to the next best thing and the next best thing. All right. I've probably droned on long enough. Let's take a moment here to close today's episode with a card drawing. I don't think I've ever used this deck before, but it's the Affirmators Morning Mantras deck. Let's give this a little try. I'm not as familiar with these cards, so we'll just see how the universe wants to contribute to today's conversation. I can spend my day feeling daunted, or I can spend it climbing over the thing that's daunting me. If I'm gonna spend, it might as well be a good investment. I love this little picture on this. This is a picture of a Venus flytrap, and like this little like plant bridge over it with like this little ladybug crawling over it. So scared of the thing that is daunting, but if you're going to feel daunted regardless, you might as well tackle it. Kind of perfect, right? Because maybe there's that thing that you've been thinking about throughout this episode that you're like, oh, this is just too much. I just don't know if I'm ready. Maybe I'll push it off for next holiday season. Well, maybe you do, but maybe you don't. And then that is your decision. So with that, we will end today's episode. Thank you so much for spending this time with me. And, I'm sure that you know other people going through similar situations. So please keep this in the back of your mind if you feel like it would be a useful tool to share with a friend or a family member, hopefully in a kind and supportive way. And please know there's so many other ways you can find me. If you are a regular listener to the podcast, but you didn't know that we have a full Patreon that does ad-free episodes of this podcast, and along with every level of subscriber also gets our monthly lunar guide. You should check that out. Patreon actually just changed it. So if you didn't know, or if you've checked it out before and you realize that you always get billed on the first of the month, they've actually changed it so that your billing day will actually be whatever day you sign up on. So if you want this month's lunar guide, you won't be charged again on November 1st. You'll just be charged, if you're a podcast member, it's $3 a month. If you're a meditation member, it's $6 a month. And then gentle yoga members, $12. And then community members, where you're part of like the live classes we do, that one's $18. So a lot of different choices. And the solar eclipse lunar guide is coming sometime towards the end of the week. I'm thinking probably Thursday or Friday, just so we have a little bit of lead time up before the solar eclipse. So if you're interested, please check it out. And thank you so much for tuning in again. All right, you guys, until next time.